brand. Honestly, without this program, like I should have, if without this program, I probably would have better have been like a media buyer at some agency or something, running a couple accounts, like testing different lookalikes and things, right? And like ultimately that's where, I found the most value because, I don't just do Facebook, right? Like ultimately in Facebook, I do creative and I do landing page and things like that, right? But I also run Google and I run Pinterest. And really, I had no idea how to run Google like a year ago. I really just started dabbling with Google a year ago. I never ran it before that, right? And ultimately, there's some nuance as far as like how do you run the platform, and like with Google too, there is more complexity and it's not as simple or like, kind of replicatable across every account as it is with Facebook, right? But in the MBA program, we talk about things like PSM and incrementality and how these different channels are working together that, when I came on to Google, it wasn't like I was starting from scratch. It's like, okay, PMAX is less incremental than like shopping is, sure, right? It's like, okay, brand isn't incremental. Like brand is fluffing Google with ROAS, right? And it's like coming on this, you really just have to learn kind of the nuances of the platform because you already have the high level skills built, right?
Yeah, like you're learning it in the scope of Facebook, but like you said, you're being like a fractional CMO at this point at 20. And like a few years ago, you were drop shipping at lunch at school. And like now every media platform makes it. Like you could take over television. You'd be like, oh, this works or this doesn't. You would know. Yeah. Because like it's all the same, which is crazy.
Yeah. It's like I had never ran Pinterest in my life before a couple months ago. And it's just like, I hop on it, right? And there's obviously nuances to, how does this differ from Facebook? But I understand the big picture so well that I can just easily pick, like I can easily within a couple days, like pick up the nuances from like kind of other resources, apply them to the very advanced, like high level learnings that I learned in the program, right? And from that, I really have a solid understanding of how to run these different things. And really, I think kind of someone like a brand owner, someone who has their hands in all of these different channels and is really impacting the business specifically, right? And really cares about like the business growth and not like an agency, like not like a Facebook media buying agency, right? Like someone who's really trying to grow the business. I think that is the kind of persona that would find the most value in, because like ultimately you do learn, okay, how do I set up my ad account? How do I test creatives? How do I do all these things, right? But I think what is much more important is how that leads up into actually running and operating the business. And like if ecosystem RAWs and Scrum Doc, like, I built out Scrum Docs for like email, SMS, Google, Pinterest, like I have monstrous Excel sheets, right? And like, I didn't even know how to make a pivot table, man. Like I had to use your like tutorial on how to make a pivot table.
Yeah.
And now I'm able to use pivot tables all the time. It's awesome.
Sure.
But it's honestly like I've worked with a bunch of shitty kind of coaching agencies and like I bought a shit ton of courses. I do a lot of consulting, right? And like bar none, that initial investment I made, which was half of my net worth at the time, like I did not have a lot, right? Was honestly the greatest return on investment I've ever gotten in my life, bar none. And I really don't believe like I would have gotten to the position where I'm at now if I wouldn't have joined that. And I remember like on our initial call, I I didn't move forward because I wanted to scrape together a bit more money. So I wasn't like, I was still living out of my parents' house. Like I was watching the MBA program from like my childhood bedroom and everything. Right.
I love it.
Yeah, but like ultimately that was really like the springboard as far as like it taught me the things that I didn't know I needed to learn, right? And you hit on so many different things, but really I'm like, okay, like I understand PSM now. And like how do I make an offer that has a high PSM? And then I go down this whole rabbit hole and then I acquire like a whole new skill set, right? And like really when I talk to like at least the feedback I've gotten when I talk to kind of like clients that come to me, like on a sales call or something like that, like I just talk to them about like how Facebook actually works and like ultimately what should you actually be focusing on? Because like or at least from what I've been told, right? Nearly everyone who's came to me before, like their agency is just like throwing up Advantage Plus, just like the agency is telling them, oh, we're validating a bunch of different audiences and then we're going to hit scale. And like, they get all this bullshit over and over again. And like, frankly, it's probably because like that person believes that. And that person really like thinks that's what they're doing. That's what to do best. Right. But I really come on, and like a lot of times no one has even said the things I say to these people before. Right. Like these brands that come, like no one has even addressed this topic. Like I frankly like parted ways with a client just because they couldn't understand the concept of like incrementality, and they were like basing everything off of, you know, blended and like CAC and CPA and things like that. Right. And it's like, ultimately, like I have extreme amounts of confidence now. And when I come on to a brand, I have really an action plan as far as what do I actually need to do to help this business. Right. And before that, honestly, it was frankly like, you know, I kind of knew, I kind of thought I knew how to run Facebook. And I'm like, I remember when I first came on with Greta and Davey, I audited one of their accounts. And I remember just like being like, oh, you're not retargeting like 25% video viewers and all these, like, I'm like, you know, we can squeeze out little wins here and there. Right. And like, ultimately, all of that is redundant and useless. And now it's like, when I come on, I'm like, what's your LTV? And they're like, well, we don't know what our LTV is. And, you know, and like things like that. And like, okay, what is your like, media mix? Like what is your target on Facebook? What's your target on Google? You're using any attribution software to help kind of validate what you're seeing, right? Like I'm addressing so much more topics that actually matter. And I think that is something that's really lacking in kind of the content space as far as like what people are doing, like putting out on Twitter, putting out on Instagram and things. And because, you know, it's constantly, you know, there are good, like other, you know, good creators out there. Right. But like, in my opinion, they're few and far between. Everyone who's good is like very small. In my opinion, like I found like a very good Google, you know, creators and like there's a lot of people out there, right? But, you know, trust me, I've looked for something similar to the MBA program for like Google ads, or like I've looked everywhere for these like very, very powerful like courses and programs that I can enroll myself into. I'm a big believer in like reinvesting in myself and reinvesting in knowledge, things like that.
Best investment you can make is in yourself. ROI like nothing else ever can.
Yeah, 100%. And at least what I found is there's just simply like nothing out there that's nearly the equivalent of what we talk about, right? Because ultimately, like it's like you're sitting in a boardroom with like a 9-figure brand, right? And it's like that's the topic of discussion. And like I never would have been able to do that. Like I never would have been able to be in those rooms. It probably would have taken me 10 years to kind of get to the like sophistication I'm at now.
Yeah.
And it's so obvious too. It's like I remember the first time I was going through the program, it was like, why have I been doing it? This makes so much sense. This is so simple. It makes so much sense. Why have I not came to this conclusion myself? Or like you'll clarify something in like a call in the Facebook group, right? And I'm just like, why have I not even thought of that? Like it's like I remember I used to not even like think about LTV or think about gross margin, and like it's really like remarkable. And I think too, like I'm very active in the Facebook group, just because like really I don't think there's people that kind of understand these topics anywhere else. Like there's obviously a lot of knowledgeable people on Twitter and things like that, right? But like I'm able to post a question in either you or someone in the program, because there's tons of people who are very, very successful in the program, right? And it's like, if something does go haywire, because like ultimately stuff will like mess up, stuff happens, right?
Absolutely.
And I'm like, what is happening here? Like I don't know what to do, right? In the rare instances where it's like I'm following like the theory, right? But the results aren't there. Like what is happening, right? Like I'm able to post about it and get like specific feedback on like my specific situation. And like that is really, really powerful. I wish to God that there was something like that for like Google or for like creatives, and they're just not. right? And I think that, that's the kind of community that's in it is really, really, really remarkable. Like I had Zach, who's in the program now. He's like a colleague of mine. He asked if he saw like a thing I posted on Twitter and was like, should he join? I like pushed him 100%. Like it's definitely the greatest like return I've gotten, right? So I haven't talked to him about, but I'm sure he's found this extremely valuable, right? But like ultimately, what I'm doing right now is I'm working fractionally as like head of growth, like managing the channels, managing acquisition, right? But ultimately, I'm wanting to launch my own brands within the next, couple of years, right? That's like ultimately my goal. And really the program has really given me the confidence that like even just like selecting the product and selecting the niche and like thinking about like not just like is this product like a winning product or like a trend or something, it's like I'm able to justify it with really sound like business fundamentals. And ultimately, when I do launch that brand, I'm going to feel like at least like I'm going to have to, I'm not going to have to hire some marketing agency to media buy for me. Like I'm not going to have to rely on it's kind of ironic because like ultimately I work fractionally and I run ads for people, right? But I think it's really an unwise decision to really like hand off your growth to someone else, right? Besides me. But but like I think it's like for if you're working with like an ad agency or something, right? It's you really give up a lot of control of like are you growing or not, and you just have to have faith in this team you've hired, right? And it's like I've like a couple of people have came to me and they're just like they're not big enough for me to like work with them because it just doesn't make sense for like my retainer and time and things like that, right?
Yeah,
but like I do in like I work in like a consulting manner with them, like where I get on like for like an hour every 2 weeks, right? And I help them media buy, and it's like I can give them the like this is how you run Facebook, and they can do it themselves, and like I can give them the kind of template for Facebook on this is what you do, right? Because ultimately media buying is not something that is going to take up huge amounts of your day, right? It's like if you're touching it more than a couple times a week, you're doing something wrong. And like ultimately, even more than once a week sometimes, granted on how big the brand is and things like that. Like ultimately what like takes up a lot of my time on a day-to-day basis is like besides creative and things like that is really kind of measuring incrementality and kind of like I know you're not a big fan of like multi-touch attribution and things like that, right? But it's like kind of reading the data and kind of coming up with like hypotheses about like, with reading like Northbeam data, I'm looking at like first click, right? Because I understand the theory of like why we don't rely on that like completely, right?
It's good information.
That gives me, and it gives me insight as far as, okay, Google is doing really well on first click. So let me test like an incrementality test in ecosystem ROAS, right? Let me shift some dollars to Google, see what happens, right? And it's like that, like pulling all this data into Excel sheets, doing like 4PI analysis, doing all these things. That's ultimately what like a media buyer should be doing, in my opinion, and like spending hours a day trying to like adjust bid caps or like test different audiences and things. And I think as a brand owner too, especially if at like under 6 figures a month, right? Really, I don't think media buying should take more than like an hour a week, frankly, right? It's like throw up PMAX, throw up a shopping, throw up a one campaign, and you're set. Right. And there's not kind of managing that incrementality because, at a smaller scale, it's not as relevant as, if we're spending hundreds of thousands a month, things like that. Sure. Right. So it's like a brand owner, I think it's a no brainer because what this really teaches you, it teaches you just like how to simplify the machine and do less work with better results. Right. Because like ultimately, you're not just trying to duck work. Right. It's like, but you're trying to get the best results out of the machine you possibly can. And what correlates with that is being more hands off and simplifying it. So like if I was, a brand owner at, really of any size, but even specifically like I'm doing under 6 figures a month, right? It's like this course is going to teach you how to do like media buying. It's going to teach you not only like the Facebook structure, just like how to set this up and you're managing it like hour a week, right? But it's going to teach you the fundamentals of how these other channels work so that, when it's time to get into Google, it's like you understand how, the incrementality of different channels and how like Facebook's affecting, like you understand all these things where it's like you probably wouldn't even have to outsource media buying specifically till, well into 7 figures. like in my vision, where like your time is super, super, stretched and things, right? It's like, I think even if you're not managing it, right? And it's like, you do have someone on your team or like even an agency managing it, right? I think it's very important to have an understanding of how the platforms work, because like ultimately, like I work in brands where they don't like understand Facebook at all, and they're not involved whatsoever in like, direct response. Like they're not in that space at all, right? They're in like they're like very product focused. And I've worked in brands where it's like they have a Facebook background and they like have a like kind of, they're more of these kind of like serial e-com guys, like launching brands, things like that, right? And I think like I get on with them and they're like, why are you doing it this way? Like why, or like, what is this Golden Bear campaign? Like, what the hell is this thing? Right. And it's like, I explain it to them and they're like, oh shit, that makes so much sense. Right. And I think it's good to have that understanding of like, ultimately you're in the MBA program and you learn Facebook, right? But as a brand owner, you gain the understanding of like, how do you use these channels to amplify the actual business? And how do you manage these channels with very little time with the maximum results possible? And I think honestly, that is kind of priceless, because like I don't know what you're charging for now, right? But back, when I joined, it was like the cost of probably like a agency's retainer for, a couple months, a month or two or something in that range, depending on your size, right? And I'm like, paying, like most likely that agency is doing a subpar job and getting you worse results than you could just managing it for yourself an hour a week and with that, you gain like a community of all these people who like run their own brands, run their own agencies, like work with all these clients. Right. It's like really, regardless of the situation you're in, you're going to have value there. And you learn these topics that really I wouldn't have learned anywhere else. Like, I work, with this one CFO, we have fractional CFO, and he's been like a really good mentor to me and things. Right. But it's like I had a kind of fundamental understanding of like the things he was talking about before I came on, right? It's like, as I understood that, and I think nowadays my age doesn't hold me back at all, because like I get on calls and I'm very like eloquent in the way I explain things, because like I've been in the group for over a year. I've been engrossed in this space, right? And before that, like I highly doubt anyone would have taken me seriously or like trusted me with 6-figure budgets, right?
And it's funny when that number next to your name goes from like your age to how much revenue you can drive. And people are like, oh, I don't care if it's 18 or it's 80. You can manage millions. Fantastic. Like that's all that anybody cares about at some point. And like the fact that you can speak so eloquently, because you've already been given the lingo, you've been given the explanation, you've been given like the keys to the kingdom and a copy and paste, just like turnkey solution to be able to talk to literally anyone. Like you mentioned, 9-figure business exits and all these things, and nobody's gut checking your credibility, because as soon as you start talking, they're like, oh shit, he knows what he's doing and he's better than everybody else. And like, I love that. It makes me so happy.